Thank you all for coming and joining us tonight for this event with Chris Kraus and Olivia Erlanger. We are celebrating the release of Olivia's first catalog on her work, which is published in conjunction with her exhibition on view in our lower gallery entitled If Today Were Tomorrow. CAM is open until 9 p.m. tonight, so I definitely encourage all of you to check out the work and to spend time with it before it closes next week. Olivia focused on speculative world building through her sculptural installations, which collectively explore varying notions of home. The show's accompanying catalog is published by HatchaCons with contributions from architect Lydia Kalopalidi, speculative fiction writer Mark von Schlegel, and our visiting critic, Chris Kraus. Copies will be available for purchase and signing directly following the talk. Olivia and I both feel so fortunate, Chris, to have you as a part of this project. When we were dreaming of the dreamiest potential contributors, Chris was at the top. Her multi-hyphenate career has impacted us both. Chris has written capaciously and compellingly about contemporary visual art as a writer and critic, destabilizing writing genres in her wake. She is a co-editor of the independent press Semiotext. As a filmmaker, Chris's labyrinthian narrative style and the piercing dialogues in her scripts inform the development of Olivia's work, including Olivia's recent investigations into the infrastructure of suburbia. When the invitation for this conversation at CAM was first pitched to Chris about 6 months ago, she responded in a way that feels so singularly her. She quipped, "I'm a tentative yes, but I do not know who I will be then." We are tickled to have wooed her to Houston for her first trip to the city. And just to give you a lay of the land of how tonight will work, the evening will commence with Chris reading her essay, followed by a short presentation by Olivia. We'll then transition to a conversation between these two women before closing with a few questions from the audience. So Chris, thank you, welcome, and we'll let you kick it off.
It was so great to see the exhibition this morning. You know, you write about a show and the show doesn't really exist yet, it's still in preparation, and you're trying to imagine what it might be, which was very hard. And there were so many things that I think occurred as she created the installation here that were really unexpected and exciting. The kind of architectural nature of it, it's like sort of stepping into a whole terrarium environment. It was very wonderful. So those who haven't seen it, I hope you get a chance to. I'm just gonna read what I wrote about Olivia's work, and then in a little while we're gonna talk. So let me see. Yeah. For more than a decade, in sculpture, stories, essays, performance, and narrative film, Olivia Erlanger's work has been probing the difficult question of how our most private, internal, and psychological lives are shaped and reshaped by forces completely outside ourselves. The infinite loop between self and the world was the central topic of European 19th century novels. The obsession of writers like Charles Dickens, Balzac, George Eliot, Flaubert, and Jane Austen. 2 centuries later, the notion of the world has become much more amorphous. The world outside the self has become an ungraspable notion, omnipresent but always elusive, an invisible web. Most contemporary literary fiction prefers to ignore it. Instead, the investigation has been taken up by critical theory, speculative architecture, gaming, sci-fi, visual art, and horror films. Erlanger's work makes excellent use of all these forms. Language and Money, the philosopher Franco Berardi wrote in his 2017 book, The Soul at Work, are not at all metaphors, and yet they are immaterial. They are nothing, and yet they can do everything. They move, displace, multiply, and destroy. They are the soul of semiocapital. Growing up in the 1990s and early 2000s, Erlanger was profoundly influenced by the global financial crash of 2008. The crash was precipitated by the reckless promotion of subprime mortgages. As details unfolded, it became apparent that all the single-family, split-level suburban homes that fueled the American dream were in fact houses of sand. At a young age, Erlanger began to question the very notion of home ownership and the unreal reality of global finance. The chaotic collapse of the housing market during the financial crisis of '08 is brilliantly visualized in the 3 snow globe sculptures that Erlanger made for Split Level Paradise, her 2020 Bellamy show. In Soft Kiss, a generic suburban split-level house rests on a lawn made of tabletop glass set into the globe. But the glass platform is tilted and covered with weed debris, traces of mold, and artificial white snow. It's a perfect and koan-like metaphor, the dream of private home ownership, unpended and resting on something that's slightly fetid. Everywhere, Eugene Lim writes in his 2017 novel, Dear Cyborgs, there is no there, except for those and that's fucked. There's hell. Detroit, Dharavi, Guyang Village, Cova de Muta, Oakland. The smoothing of all difference into capitalist civility is remarkably unremarked on. Oh, the omnipotent juices of the market's gut. It eats it all. And maybe the non-marking is but one aspect of the digestive process. How quietly it eats. Like the city itself, the complex is unknowable. One's neighbors are so close and yet so far away. I have been looking, Erlanger told Rosie Sharp, around these ideas of systemic crisis, global financial crisis, which is what I came of age in. It's frustrating because we never give these things a language of volume or density. She was interested then in the philosopher Timothy Morton and in hyperobjects, a term that he'd coined to describe things like climate and the global economy that are at once completely real and very abstract. And so she set out to do this in some of her earliest sculptural works, in exhibitions like The Oily Actor 2016 and The Body Electric the next year. Erlanger found ways to physicalize the sensations caused by these real but elusive abstractions, financial flows. Her sound piece, I Am No Viper, Yet I Feed, used data points in Zillow's Detroit real estate valuations behind a playlist to create a distorted ambient soundscape. And in Body Electric, a thick mist of fog and blue light, its rhythm dictated by changes in oil prices, was pumped into the gallery, immersing viewers. In this show, Erlanger bisects the museum into 4 zones: the Aero, the Planetarium, the Sitcom, and the Diorama zones. The Sitcom zone is really a theater where viewers sit and watch Appliance, her 16 or 17-minute horror genre-inspired film that has been at least several years in the making. Its precursors include her book of the same name, published in conjunction with her show Appliance at Kunstverein Gartenhaus in Vienna, and the play Humor in the Water Coolant, which she wrote and staged for that show. The play's leading characters include the anthropomorphized oven, house, lamp, shower, and fridge, as well as the humans Sophie and Crystal, who have both migrated out of the play and into the film. Erlanger's psychoarchitectural investigation of suburbs began in 2015 when she started work on her book Garage, A Secret History of the Garage as a Space of Creativity, co-written with the Mexican architect Luis Ortega Govella. The original manuscript for the book was called Hate Suburbia and published by Publication Studio. Home, she believes, is a metaphor for the body, the siding its skin, the appliances its vital organs. During the course of this suburban research, Erlanger studied the histories of household appliances, the toilet and the shower, the oven, the fridge. the 20th century extension of urban space into peripheral zones that could not have occurred without the expansion of public utility infrastructure that flushes and fills these machines. Every suburban house is a body existing alone. And yet, on a poetic but completely material level, it's the appliances that offer a way out of this isolated hell. Their pipes and electrical cables connect the familiar suburban split level to the more public spaces of reservoirs, sewers, and grids. In Appliance, the film, 24, Sophie's a young single woman whose history is unspecified and unknown. She could be an actress, lanky and white with long, glossy brown hair. She looks like the final girl of every bad horror movie. She's just bought an old house in the country. And like many before her, the viewer senses, she's fled the city because her chosen career hasn't fully worked out. Her rural escape seems to be in upstate New York, where sadness rises out of the ground. Sophie's new house, shown to a familiar acquaintance on a FaceTime video tour, could not be more generically, superficially ideal. Whatever history or happiness its old wood plank floors and sloping ceilings might once have contained have been gutted and whitewashed, replaced with middle-class 21st century signifiers of happiness. The gleaming stainless steel appliances in kitchen and KitchenAid mixer, the white ceramic wood stove, the wrought iron black faux coronial latches on the white wood-painted doors. Like Sophie herself, the house could not be more sterile or sad. Living alone but still craving a child, she's apparently getting IVF treatment, injecting her bruised skin every night with fertility drugs. Sophie sleeps curled at the foot of her bed like a fetus, holding on to her phone. We know right away that things are about to get weird. The house, dreamt of as a refuge, assumes a life of its own that maddeningly echoes Sophie's disease and surfacing trauma. The appliances hum, the oven breathes. Mysteriously, somehow the fridge has unplugged itself, and Sophie's perfect assortment of healthy whole foods inside it is covered in mold. As Stephen King observed in his essay, The Modern American Movie, Text and Subtext, horror films frighten us because of the ways they connect the unreal to the real. Horror films depict social, financial, and sociological stress and then move deeper inside, probing our most deep-seated personal fears. Terrified Sophie consults Crystal, a local exorcist she's found online, to cleanse her new home. Despite her nightly and painful efforts to become pregnant, Sophie is still taken aback when Crystal arrives at her door after dark with her small daughter. The idea of a child being much more appealing than an actual child. True to the genre, Sophie confronts her fears. Wearing a thin cream sweater, she weeps and then cleans up the mess. But in the last shot, she looks up abruptly at something off screen. Is the terror beginning again? Appliance contains so many vital ideas that it's tempting to see the short film as the mothership or the heart of the exhibition. But if Today Were Tomorrow transforms the museum into a single sculptural space, visual themes and ideas refracted in scale and shape, through this refraction, they at once clarify and distort. Erlanger's two new sculptures, Anti-Meridian and Prime Meridian, consist of two spheres cantilevered out of the wall. Boxy, suburban, single-family type houses erupt from the skins of the planets like boils or cysts, lit from inside with loose electrical cords. Looking closer, the planets are actually three-dimensional aerial maps depicting abstracted roadways. Space is used up. The planets covered in roads like arterial veins. The four dioramas in the diorama zone, a city, a mountain, a mesa, and a park, seem to suggest an escape, like Sophie's house, into an idealized world. But looking closer, each of these four environments is demarcated, bisected by property lines, and surveilled. Mesa obscures the desert landscape with billboards and ads, while Park inspired by the Baroque garden in the movie last year at Marienbad, is a free urban space that imparts only a sense of control, an order that's been externally, imperially imposed. In Eros, when night was last dark, 16 polished aluminum arrows map a celestial constellation. Each arrow is titled with its own stellar coordinate point, the numeric system that astronomers and sailors once used positioned themselves in their crafts. During the last quarter century, light pollution has increased by 49%, rendering celestial navigation all but obsolete. Here, Erlanger recreates the sky over Houston, Texas, on the night, January 26, 1880, before Thomas Edison patented the electric light bulb. It was, she explains, the last day the sky was dark. Ecological exhaustion, environmental collapse. All of Erlanger's witty, inventive, and beautiful work is built on her deep understanding of structure, from the engineered meshes of highways and grid to the abstracted flows of finance. And Olivia's going to tell you more about it now. Thanks.
Hi. I'm going to try to open this. Okay, great. First off, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much for spending time with my practice with this project. And it's been so lovely to get to know you through that process. And just quickly, thank you again to Patricia Restrepo for inviting me to do this and giving me the chance of a lifetime, because it was a very open invitation. And with that, I got to experiment in a way that I haven't yet had the opportunity to. So I wanted to start with a central question to this project, which is, what does it mean to call a planet home? This is at the center of If Today Were Tomorrow and is something that I have long explored. In the first portion of the presentation, I'll use the sort of scale shift that's central to this question as a way to structure. So we'll look at how I move in my practice between the miniature and the monstrous. And then in the later portion, I'll focus on the one-to-one scale. So this image is known as the pale blue dot. It was taken in 1990 by Voyager 1. In it, Earth is a small fleck floating in space. And as a child of the 90s, I felt like this was on every science classroom poster and seemingly always accompanied by a Carl Sagan quote regarding the image, in which he says, "This is the only home we will ever know." This clearly had an impact on me, as I have frequently said that while a house is an architecture, a home can be a body, it can be a neighborhood, it can be a continent, or even a planet. So the pale blue dot influenced this series of sculptures called Planet Me. With these sculptures, not only did I want to show a topography of houses, roadways, strip malls, nondescript commercial buildings as a way to extrapolate the infrastructure that connects a domestic to a commercial sphere, but also to think through how humans can act as earth movers. The sculptures literally reflect on their own power, and they show the wires that lead to the light systems within. And each work is titled after a different location, real or imagined, that I have traveled to. Planet Me led directly to the development of two sculptures in If Today Were Tomorrow, Anti-Meridian and Prime Meridian. With these works, I knew that I wanted to make them larger so that they could act as a mapping axis for the sculptures. The shift in scale is intentional here because the planets still exist as miniatures, but they're further exaggerated to a point of ridiculousness. And thanks to the amazing exhibition design of Jeremy Shipper, we created forced perspectives throughout the exhibition that re-miniaturized these larger planets. The arrows in the sculptures from Planet Me have subsequently been extracted, and I present them on their own as part of a series called Arrows, E-R-O-S. The sculptures are installed to create star maps, as Chris described, where each arrow corresponds to a different star in a constellation. In developing the exhibition, I felt that if scale, especially as it relates to the question of what does it mean to call a planet home, is so important, then place is also integral. When considering a place, Earth may turn, but ultimately the stars are static and remain fixed. This means that you can map the sky over a specific location with any day and time and know what the constellations above were. For the exhibition, the installation, which is now titled Eros, When Night Was Last Dark, takes its date from the day before Edison's patent for the light bulb came through. Stars, which are historically a navigation device, made sense as a conceptual link when I'm thinking through space, or place, but then when you start to zoom into the exhibition, the ideas around place move into that of space. So when I started to consider what occupies the space of a planet, I realized that I could harness scale again. The dioramas in the exhibition are models of alien landscapes or some sort of new terrain. Each is titled after the color of a sky, as depicted in the dioramas. And this again is an indicator of weather, of climate events, but also, again, place can pop up when you start to consider what the climate is like. These are the latest development in my practice of a sculptural language that I've been utilizing for a number of years that comprises dollhouse miniatures, dollhouse architecture, as well as architectural model making materials. And for me, moving into the material language of railroad train set and dioramas just made sense. Chris actually described this work in her essay, but I first used scale models for these snow globe sculptures, which were a part of my exhibition in Split Level Paradise, which was 2020 at Bellamy in LA. And the title refers to a style of home with exaggerated floor levels that gained popularity in the years following World War II as the suburbs expanded. I was inspired to make snow globes because in Citizen Kane, the snow globe fills the frame at the open. It's an object that is a memento mori, and oddly enough, this exhibition closed right as COVID set in, so houses in bubbles sort of seems prescient now. While you couldn't see into the scale model houses in the snow globe sculptures, with the following eye works, I wanted to create peepholes for a voyeur to peek into the different rooms of a house. This exhibition, Home is a Body, also from 2020, presents the different rooms of a house. Rather than titling after place or location, I use the time of day to function as a reference to the use value of the rooms depicted. There is no figuration in this work. No occupants are represented. The missing bodies are felt even more acutely because the rooms are set inside of eyelid-shaped constructions. This is also a reminder of a kind of surveillance camera perspective, which is always focused on a fixed setting, its viewpoint eerie, and again, anchored to place. The eye sculptures have gone on to become more exaggerated in my series titled The Axe. In 2020, while writing my play Humor in the Water Coolant, I came across an etching from the early 1800s by Claude Nicolas Ledoux, depicting a neoclassical theater inside of an eye. This inspired me to make eye sculptures which contained stages, envisioning them as platforms for the play. I started to use architectural elements of dollhouse kits set inside of eyes. So I think this is probably a good time to shift again and talk about one-to-one representations in not only this exhibition, but also in my practice. So in If Today Were Tomorrow, the exhibition begins in the viewing area, which is a recreation of the living room from the film Appliance. And it kind of creates a double in the space. The short film Appliance was born out of a long-term research project, which I began in 2020 and culminated in an exhibition at Kunstfreien Gartenhaus in Vienna. I was inspired to focus my research on appliances after writing an essay about the history of the shower, in which I explore how the contemporary shower was first deployed in a French prison system, used in mental asylums as a treatment for female hysteria, before being adapted for domestic use. The publication includes 5 essays that weave together anecdotes and personal narratives while also examining the history of the washing machine, the oven, refrigerator, the toilet, and the shower. The book includes the script for the play Humor in the Water Coolant, which was performed at the opening of the exhibition and was recently restaged at ICA London. The installation in which we staged the play functioned like an open set in which different rooms of the home were defined by their component parts. From this research, I began to consider the plumbing and invisible architectures lying behind every plaster wall. Helen Molesworth, in her essay Bathrooms and Kitchens, describes how behind the walls of a home, there's a networked system of tubes and wires that mirror the human body's vascular and digestive systems. The play references this in its title, Humor in the Water Coolant, which recalls the aqueous humor of the eye, as well as mechanical fluids found in engines. The aim of the project has been to revise the metaphor of body as architecture to body as appliance. The play tells the story of a woman haunted by the appliances in her new home. The narrative was strongly informed by the short story The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Gilman Perkins, which in the story, a woman experiences hysteria while stuck in the attic of her home. During the first performance of Humor in the Water Coolant, I realized that the basic outlines of the story would be perfect for a filmic adaptation. And I also want to note that in the crowd, we have my executive producer and producer, Jill Ferraro, as well as the composer, Alexis Georgopoulos, who also did the score for the play, Humor in the Water Coolant, at ICA London. In the film, Sophie has just moved into a new home while undergoing fertility treatment. Her sense of reality takes on a distorted form as she begins to believe her house is living and breathing around her. The narrative for the film develops on Humor in the Water Coolant and plays with horror film tropes, as Chris mentioned, like that of the final girl. Barbara Creed defined a final girl as a trope wherein a woman at the end of a horror story is frequently being chased or hunted by an outside antagonist, but also usually getting undressed. In the film, I riff on ideas of hysteria, the illness that was once believed to stem from the malfunctioning uterus, which hysteria, the word, comes from the Greek hystera, which means womb. And as such, the play and the film build on metaphors around fertility and fecundity embedded within our domestic technologies. Ultimately, hysteria is not a real illness, nor do I believe that hormones make us crazy. Actually, I think it's society that makes people ill, so the film has an alien subplot. But back to humans, and back to human scale. I wanted to end here because I think it's an extremely important exercise to bend and invert our perspective from that of home is our world to world is our home. And that's all.
Hi, Olivia.
Hi, Chris.
Let's see. Yeah, okay. To sort of elaborate and expand a little bit on all the things you were just talking about, your work takes the most familiar, universal, and accepted aspirations and desires, something like home ownership, and by examining it a little bit, you render it strange. The idea that the entire planet would be carved up into tiny lots and units of private ownership, coveted, titled, bought, and sold. So I have a couple of questions about that. First, it occurs to me that's often exactly what art does or can do. Take something that's so familiar we don't question it or think about it, take it out of its habitual context and environment, and make it strange. Are there other artworks that have inspired you that do this too?
Such a great question. So many artworks. The first that comes to mind, obviously, is Duchamp's fountain, just the toilet, sort of sitting there as a sculpture. But also, I love Murette Oppenheim and her fur teacup set. And most recently, I went to a show at the Hayward Gallery. I was just in London, and there's an artist, Haegyu Yang, who opened this extraordinary exhibition with just the most prosaic, everyday elements that are just totally turned inside out. And I thought that it was excellent and something that I could aspire to do.
Yeah. I'm writing about the British artist Linda right now for a show that she's having. And she talks about doing exactly that. She's she makes photo montages. She's been doing this for half a century now, 5 decades of work. And from the very beginning, she would take the staple out of the centerfold so that the 2 pages somehow merge together. Or she'd cut out an image and she'd turn it upside down. And it was a way of making us look at things that are so familiar we don't even see them anymore. And I mean, that's exactly what you're doing with suburban environments and home ownership per se. So, okay, the second question is, can you talk about the notion of home ownership? It all came crashing down in 2008, and this is probably something you've researched a lot.
Yes, I think home ownership is interesting to me insofar as it is essential to selling the American dream. The American dream, as it was sort of branded in the last century, specifically in like a post-war America, where low interest rate mortgages were given of note only to white Christian soldiers returning from World War II. And those low interest rate mortgages were for single family homes. And so this was a way to not only incentivize economic growth, obviously incentivize like a war and sort of serving, but also the idea was that this nuclear family would come to own the single family home. And we're living through another housing crisis at present in the United States. And 2008 was something that was very formative to me. I think it pulled back a lot of the residue of the Leave It to Beaver narrative around, you know, being able to have social mobility through acquiring a single family home.
And yet, do you think the alternative is capable of engendering the same kind of desire and aspiration and dreams? The idea of living in a place that you don't own? Who was it? Who was the tech guru who predicted the future by saying you will own nothing and you will be happy? And that sounded like the most dystopian idea. No one can relate to that. So what do you think about the opposite of home ownership? Is it possible to create a romance around that?
I think a lot of other countries have renting cultures, but I think it's more so, like, I think about friends in Germany who there's no sort of conversation around, again, finding a house and a partner and having 2 kids and sort of reproducing exactly what the pop culture of our times kind of had sold to us. But I think I'm more so just the impetus of ownership is interesting to me, and home is interesting to me, and where these intersect or where they diverge, that's all fair game. But I'm not necessarily proposing any kind of future that would be anti-ownership. I think I'm just trying to situate myself in a present, and that's also what so much of the work is trying to do.
Yeah. You did something similar with your book Garage that you worked on with the architect Luis Ortega Govella. You were studying the phenomenon of garages, which, if you think about it, the history of the garage is also a history of American popular culture in the 20th century. So could you talk a little bit about what you learned about garages?
Yeah, going back to those low interest rate mortgages that I was describing a second ago, those were for homes that had attached garages because it was a twofold deal. You could incentivize building new constructions, and you could also incentivize car ownership. So the book was amazing. I learned so many things about American history, also the sort of mythology and the branding project really that is. I started my company in a garage that is so central to American titans of industry. You think of Hewlett Packard, Apple, Harley Davidson, Mattel, they all claim to sort of begin in this space, Disney. And so it's a funny thing because it's sort of the deprogrammed space of the house. That's how Luis and I frame it in the book. And then having this sort of free space also means that the garage became a central space for subculture. And it was a incubator, less so for tech, but more so for alternative lifestyles like surf and skate.
Right.
You also get garage bands, like it's just kind of endless. So I had an amazing time working on that project and met a lot of very interesting garage users.
So the garage actually becomes the escape from the perfect environment that you've dreamed of and spent all this time and money creating.
Yes, it becomes the escape. We call it the id of the home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The viewing area you've created here for the appliance film truly feels like stepping into The Shining. It's seductive and it's sinister. There are moving boxes stacked in place of furniture, nothing's permanent, and a stack of books, including Goethe's Faust, the devil's bargain of home ownership. Can you talk about how that plays out in the film? I mean, it's so...
I'm so glad
it's
that
so
you
on the
noticed
surface
that.
of the film.
I'm so glad that you noticed the Faustian bargain that's being implied through the stack of books. But I think in general, you know, the narrative that's at hand is really, again, maybe even more universal than just trying to acquire something, but it's more like what happens when you get the thing you thought you wanted and it's still not enough. And so it's really a narrative of the horrors that aspiration can bring to you and that are really self-perpetuated. In the end, the question of, is there a haunting? Are the appliances alive? Is the house alive? Is it an alien antagonist? It's really, at the end of the day, just this one woman alone in a home.
Yeah. The film is conceived and produced in the genre rules of horror movies, and the lead actress, Callie Hernandez, seeks refuge in a house that ultimately threatens to consume her. It's beautifully shot and produced, and it's very convincing. Your work jumps across genres in an astonishing way in the pursuit of your ideas. How daunting was it to produce a film like that? Was it a different skill set required than making an installation? And then finally, what artist movies recently have you admired?
Oh, it's also such a great question. I think, again, I had incredible producers involved. So the film is the result of so many people's talent, creativity, time, especially time, because these things take way longer than you think they will. And I think there's sort of strategies of storytelling and world building that I'm deploying both in my sculptures, installations, and how I think through making sculptures and installations that are very similar to the world building and narrative storytelling that's happening in the film, but they diverge in the sense that making a film and directing requires so much communication and collaboration, and then trust. You just have to trust in all of the collaborators. And so that was really incredible. Other artist films, it's two artists I greatly admire who make films have also shown here, Jordan Strafer and Diane Severin Wynn. And I recently went to, there's this amazing Chantal Ackerman show that was at Beaux-Arts in Brussels, and I got to see some of her earliest works. And there's also this amazing quote that I'm gonna butcher, or I'll even try to paraphrase, that kind of goes back to the beginning of your question, where she's describing how people ask her, why would you make a movie about a play? And why would you make a documentary about music? And why would you make a comedy about a performance piece? And her response is to that is that the word artist demands that. So
Yeah. Do you see yourself ever, putting everything into a single genre, into a film?
oh my God. Yeah, I feel like I am following a thread in every single project and every iteration. I mean, also I think in my presentation what really comes across hopefully is how much iterating is happening, but every single time I'm transforming things and testing things out. And so I just feel like I'm pulling a thread in the dark or something a little bit to get a little bit closer to what things could be. I don't know if that's an answer to the question. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And each, all of the execution of the ideas in all these different genres involves a lot of technical mastery.
Yeah, but that again is like because of so many incredible collaborators. It depends completely. Like some things, I can do on a sculptural level, and other things I can't. I collaborated with a dioramicist on the dioramas who is professionally making dioramas and learned so much from them. So it's also every new project affords me the opportunity to learn, which I think is the greatest gift for me as an artist.
Yeah. Yeah, can you talk about those dioramas, the 4 dioramas? They're also kind of cinematically inspired. The one called Blue Sky looks like Last Year at Marienbad, and they depict different geographical locales.
Yeah, the dioramas, we were talking about this earlier today, actually, walking through the show with Patricia. And when I first had the idea, I mean, I said something crazy. I was like, I want to make a diorama of the memory of snow. And somehow this lady trusted me to figure out what the heck I was talking about. And they ended up completely not about that. They're really not about memory at all, but rather about displays of ownership and displays of power. Even the vernacular of a diorama, the way it's inset into the wall, frequently they have glass or placards, like that is all sort of displaying authority, displaying, again, like a sense of an imperial notion over space and place. And the cinematic references, I mean, there were many, and specifically Blue Sky does reference Last Year at Marienbad. And I wanted to reference that film because I think structurally it's so interesting, because it's constantly shifting in time, in space, in place, which if there was ever an intention that I set out to with the exhibition design and with kind of creating this, circular, porous space, it would be to create a structure that similarly could flow, I guess.
Yeah. And can we talk about the last part of the show, Eros, that takes us beyond the earth and into the sky? Can you explain the relationship of the Eros to the celestial map? And what about the light pollution that prevents us from seeing the night sky?
Yeah, I think, again, it felt very important to have something about this exhibition relate to the location in which it is happening. So when we started to talk about what it meant to do a show like this in Houston, I think it was a really nice tie-in to kind of, again, when you're shifting scale all the way out to like beyond a planetary level and you're talking about a constellation, to again have this very tight tether to this city. So the stars, the arrows in the installation, each map to a different star that was in the night sky in January 26, 1880. And I like that date, as I mentioned earlier, because it, in my mind, it's the day before Edison's patent for his light bulb came through. So in my mind, it's really like the last time that the night sky would be dark enough for you to actually see the stars. And light pollution seems important to me, not only, again, talking about planetary scales, thinking about a planet as a home, but also because so much of the work in the show is illuminated. And it's essentially like you're traversing a darkened landscape with all of these sort of light beams shining out either from a window on one of the planet sculptures or from the dioramas or the massive screen that's playing the film.
It's so hard to imagine that kind of thick black darkness that's just kind of impenetrable.
I know.
It's really hard to find now.
It is very hard to find, yeah. It's another thing that maybe I only have a memory of. I really couldn't tell you the last time that I could, see all the stars.
The last question, or my last question. The architect Lydia Calapalti brings in a really interesting idea in her essay about your work. She talks about the cycling of ideas that goes on within the exhibition. Things flow into one another. There's no linear progression, not even a conclusion. And so the viewer feels a kind of weightlessness. Is this something that you consciously tried to do? Or is it what happens when you bring so many elements together? It does seem like the exhibition here brings together a lot of strands of thought and image you've been pursuing for a long time, and in a very open-ended and provocative way.
So much of what I presented on and what you wrote about seems to have very clear through lines. But I can tell you as an artist that making all of these different works, I'm lost every time. I think I'm reinventing the wheel every time. And so it's hard to say if a sense of weightlessness was something that I set out to create, because I really was thinking of it more as an experiment, as an opportunity to do something that I hadn't yet been able to do, which is to show in the same exhibition space all of the disparate ways in which I make. So to have a film be in the same space as my sculpture, to be a part of an immersive installation, and all of this is something that, usually it's sort of, I'm able to develop one discrete body of work at a time. And in that experiment, for it to evoke a sense of weightlessness is incredible. And I'm curious about what it evoked in all of the different visitors, honestly, because for me, I really think of it as again, an opportunity just to play and test things out and to learn what I should do the next time.